Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu filling in for Riz Khan. The Dalai Lama has held a meeting with US President Barack Obama in Washington, D.C. Shortly after they spoke, the exiled Tibetan spiritual leader addressed the media outside the White House.
I feel great seeing President of the greatest democratic country. So since my childhood, I always admire America, not economy or military power, but mainly as a champion of democracy, freedom, human value.
The meeting has triggered yet another spat between the world's largest economy and its fastest growing one. China says the White House meeting would, quote, seriously undermine Sino-US relations. China has also denounced Washington's recent decision to sell more than $6 billion in military hardware to Taiwan. In the past few months, US criticism of China over internet censorship and currency manipulation have added to the tensions. Today we ask, what is the state of relations between the United States and China? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and of course we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me now in the studio is Bonnie Glaser. She is with the Washington, D.C. based foreign policy think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ms. Glaser works on issues related to China. Also with us, Suisan Zhao, Professor of International Studies at the University of Denver. He's also the author and editor of 9 books on China, including China and the United States, Cooperation and Competition in Northeast Asia. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Bonnie Glaser, let me start with you. The visit by the Dalai Lama to the White House, it has been controversial, as we've been reporting. Why is the administration risking a further deterioration in relations with China by entertaining the Dalai Lama?
Well, first I should say that every president since George H.W. Bush has met with the Dalai Lama. This practice started in 1990. And it is very important for our domestic political scene, quite frankly. And also, I think it is important for our president to, as the Dalai Lama said himself, to champion the cause of freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and to call attention to the plight of the Tibetans in China, whom we hope will have greater freedom and greater autonomy. The Dalai Lama is a spiritual leader. We do not recognize him as a political leader. And the United States does stand for territorial integrity of China, and we recognize their sovereignty over Tibet. But we do hope that by meeting with him, that more attention will be paid around the world to the situation in Tibet that the Tibetans face, and really stand up for our rights and our principles as a people.
Okay, I guess some are asking, or saying rather, that this question has more relevance now because he wasn't as vocal about China's human rights record when he visited Asia last year.
Well, this is certainly true. The Obama administration has sent some mixed messages on the importance or the role of human rights in its foreign policy overall. When Secretary Clinton first went to Asia last year, she actually said that human rights should not be allowed to interfere with cooperation on other issues. But I think she sort of quickly backpedaled from that position. Human rights is important to this administration, and we can have differences and stand up for our principled position and certainly defend our national interests on those issues where we differ. But at the same time, we have a very important set of issues to cooperate on with China. And I think that the Chinese know that. And so I don't expect that this meeting with the Dalai Lama is going to complicate U.S.-China relations in any really enduring way.
Well, let's go to Dr. Zhao, who is in Denver. Dr. Zhao, as Bonnie Glaser has been pointing out, all U.S. presidents since 1990 have met with the Dalai Lama. Yet Beijing is very upset at this visit that's taking place right now. What is the source of Beijing's anger right now?
Because Beijing sees Dalai Lama not as a religion leader. They see him as a political leader championing Tibetan independence, although I would say that's not true because Dalai Lama has given up his appeal for the Tibetan independence. He has asked for authentic autonomy for Tibetan people and also preserve the Tibetan culture, language, heritage. And But Beijing tried to see that from a very, very political perspective because they are very concerned the territorial integrity, as Bonnie mentioned, especially since 2008. They were surprised by the unrest in Tibet. They were very concerned how deep that unrest is in the Chinese society and Chinese policy, and how the exiled community led by the Dalai Lama is related to those uprisings. So they see the U.S. president meeting with Dalai Lama as a support to the Dalai Lama's what they perceived as independent tendency, and also to send a wrong message to the world. So they see it from very different perspective.
There was a view among the exiled Tibetan community when the visit last year was postponed that the fact that it was postponed had weakened their cause. Do you believe that was the case at the time?
I don't think so. The U.S. stand on Tibetan issue has not been changed. In fact, U.S. has never said Tibetan independence is the right way to go. As Bonnie mentioned, U.S. always recognized Tibet is part of China. And also from U.S. perspective, China is a very important rising power, and the relationship between U.S. and China is very important. Obama's first visit in China last November was a very, very important visit, try to build a trust between these two big powers. So I think Obama did the right thing at that point to cancel his meeting with Dalai Lama, to send a very friendly, very good message to the Chinese leaders. We are not challenging your what they call as core or vital national interests. We are willing to work with you. But we should be aware of that. When Obama was in China, he was very clear to the Chinese leaders. He will meet His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, just a matter of time. So he canceled that at that moment. I think will not weaken the Tibetan movement.
Okay.
And was a very, very good way to do it.
Okay.
I actually have a bit of a different point of view because I think that although the impact was temporary, it was negative. When President Obama decided to postpone his meeting with the Dalai Lama last October, the willingness of other foreign leaders to meet with the Dalai Lama was also called into question. And so I think it did sort of temporarily set back the cause of the exile movement. I think that will now change once the president has now met with the Dalai Lama. But if the United States won't stand up and take criticism from Beijing, then certainly other leaders are unwilling to do so. I would also say that I think that we raised some expectations in China by putting off decisions like this and the arms sale to Taiwan for an entire year. And I do think that leaders in Beijing appreciated this and may have even pocketed it and expected that maybe the administration would do more to take into account China's core national interests, even at the expense of defending our national interests. And I think that that was mistaken. So I think we're in a period now where we're going to have some readjustment and recalibration in the U.S.-China relationship.
Right. We did get an email on this. It's from. Go ahead, Dr. Zhao. You want to say something?
I agree with Barney to a certain extent. I think here the purpose is not something to damage the Tibetan movement. It's how to be constructive, how to bring these two sides together to have constructive dialogue. In fact, after the meeting, the dialogue was restored after about a year. Stopped a year ago. I think that's a positive sign. Although this dialogue, the last dialogue last month, did not accomplish much, but I think the purpose here is to show to Chinese leaders that the U.S. policy is not to support Tibetan independence. U.S. wants these two sides to understand each other and to have a constructive dialogue.
Okay, we've received an email here from Alfeo Musa talking about China's relations in the world, and he writes, China only cares about its own economic or strategic interests. This can be seen from its ruthless engagement with countries like Iran, Zimbabwe and Sudan. Therefore, dealing with China will always be difficult. It's a good point, isn't it?
Well, it's a bit extreme, I would say. China, I think, does have a bit more of what I would call a selfish agenda than it should. China is still a basically poor developing country in terms of per capita income. Obviously, in terms of its overall gross domestic product, it's just about the number 2 in the world. So China sort of has this dual image of itself with 1 foot in the developed camp and 1 foot in the developing camp. And some of its behavior is selfish. They do want to emerge as a bigger power. They want to have economic modernization and a stronger military power. But slowly we are seeing China take on some more responsibility in some key areas where they're cooperating, for example, on the Horn of Africa in the anti-piracy operation. And they have a very large contingent that they contribute to peacekeeping operations at the United Nations. And these are trends that we should encourage.
Well, there is a common perception that China's rising very quickly and will soon supersede the United States in terms of its international power and influence. That could be a misperception, not a perception. I was looking at a piece that was written by Joshua Kurlansik from the Council on Foreign Relations here in the United States, in which he says Asia is indeed increasing its economic footprint in the world, but it still lags far behind the United States in military might, political and diplomatic influence, and even most measures of economic stability.
That is absolutely true. I mean, certainly in the military area, China pales by comparison to the United States, and I don't think it has the ambitions to have a military the size of the United States. In the economic area, our per capita income now in the United States is about 40,000. China's is less than 4,000. So it certainly lags behind in many indicators of comprehensive national power. But China is emerging as a bigger power. But we should not exaggerate the power that it has, nor should we assume that the United States is on the decline and that China will very soon be the sole superpower in the world. That would be a great miscalculation. But I would say that I don't think Chinese leaders see it that way either. I think they recognize that they really do have a long way to go just to meet the needs of their people and solve the problems that they have domestically.
Okay, we have to take a short break right now. We'll have more. Dr. Zhao, I'll get back to you right after the break. We'll have more of our discussion in just a moment. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're discussing rising tensions between the United States and China and asking what an increasingly assertive Beijing means for Washington and the rest of the world. Joining me in the studio is Bonnie Glaser. She's with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ms. Glaser works on issues related to Chinese foreign and security policy. Also with us, Suisan Zhao, Professor of International Studies at the University of Denver. He's also written and edited several books on China. Dr. Zhao, let me start with you for this half of the program. Looking at some of the other issues that afflict the relationship between the United States and China, the United States recently announced that it will be selling arms to Taiwan, $6 million worth of hardware. Was that a provocation in your view?
Yeah, from Chinese perspective, especially it is, especially after 1 year that Obama, since he came to office, stopped and is deferred the sale, and China hoped Obama would not continue that. But Obama did announce the sale. From China's perspective, China was very angry, and this time China has took a very, very tough position on this. In the past, China only talked tough, did not do anything real, actions. But this time, they have threatened to sanction American companies involved in the arms sale. This is the first time. In fact, on January 6th, when Obama first time announced the contract was given, Chinese military officers threatened, pushed the government to put sanctions, and the government did not really take that stand. Then last month, when the second time the Obama administration announced that, Chinese foreign ministry people said they will put sanctions. So this shows China's newly founded assertiveness and also confidence in their relationships with the U.S. They thought they have more in their hands to deal with the United States. In fact, this goes back to the earlier question, that is, China's influence in the global stage has increased, and China has assertive. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think it was a provocative act?
Well, I would certainly say that from my personal point of view, it was not provocative. And I think that the Obama administration believes that selling arms to Taiwan at this particular juncture is necessary. First of all, it is the Taiwan government that has asked for the arms because they face a growing military threat from China. And although relations between Taiwan and mainland China are actually improving, President Ma Ying-jeou of Taiwan feels that it is important to have signs of visible support from the United States so that he can continue this policy of engaging with the mainland and negotiating with the mainland to solve some of the differences between them and to expand their economic relationship and then move into discussion of more sensitive political and military issues. But I think that this was the right thing to do at this time. And I would also say that China knew very early on from the Obama administration, in fact, even during the campaign before the president won the election, that he stood in favor of honoring our commitments to Taiwan, under which is U.S. domestic law, the Taiwan Relations Act, that we would provide the necessary defense articles, as we say, and services, weapons and support, in order to help Taiwan to defend itself. And that indeed is the purpose, the main purpose of us selling arms to Taiwan.
One other big issue that impacts relations between Washington and Beijing, and that is trade relations. There's a huge imbalance in trade between these two countries, huge trade deficit. The Americans blame that on a weak Chinese currency, which they say the Chinese artificially keep low. President George Bush complained about it. Barack Obama's complained about it. Is that imbalance likely to affect relations in a negative way looking ahead?
Well, it is certainly true that we have a big trade deficit with China, and it is, I think it would be in China's interest over the longer term to move to a freely floating currency. But the Chinese did revalue their currency almost 20% over a period when the Bush administration was still in power. This did not narrow the trade deficit. So I think that the calls by the president and other people in the administration to have the Chinese revalue their currency now may be more for domestic political reasons. If we really want to get at the trade deficit, we need to look at some other things. We need to have some more liberal areas for Americans to invest in China. The Chinese engage in some unfair trading practices, giving subsidies to some of their exporters. There are a lot of reasons why that trade deficit is so wide. And the U.S. and China have a strategic and economic dialogue where they're seeking to rebalance their economies. I mean, some of the problems in the imbalance between our economies is on the U.S. side. We obviously need to save more. The Chinese save too much, and we save too little. But I think that this is not something that's going to be solved overnight, but it is a huge domestic political issue, and I think there's been a firestorm of criticism, both of the Chinese for keeping their currency pegged to the dollar, not allowing it to freely float, not allowing it to revalue, and of President Obama for not insisting that the Chinese do something about the trade deficit.
Okay. Dr. Zhao, I want to talk about another issue that has affected China-U.S. relations, and that is the so-called Google battle. Now, the company, which of course runs that very well-known search engine, has complained that China had infiltrated its websites, especially its email websites. And that has caused a deterioration in relations between Beijing and Washington. Was that a storm in a teacup, or do you think that that could get worse?
I think it's pretty much past at this point, because the Google complaint about hacking in China and their business in China is both political and also business based. Politically, indeed, China has censored the internet and controlled information flow. The Google has problems with that. businessly, Google has not been doing really well in the Chinese market. Its market share has not been that big. So it threatened to pull out of the Chinese market. It's also, from business perspective, try to make a point that they need more attention and market share.
I would say actually Google's market share was rising considerably. I think it was about 36%. I don't think Google was really that concerned about the censorship. They agreed to Chinese censorship because they wanted to get into the China market. The bigger issue here is the stealing of source code and encryption of Google, and the bigger picture issue is government-backed industrial espionage. And this is going to be a bigger issue in the US-China relationship going forward.
And also going forward, as much as the United States wants to put pressure on China, on Beijing to change its human rights policies, change its policies on trade, it also needs China, doesn't it? Especially when it comes to nuclear proliferation, in North Korea for one, in Iran for another.
Oh, absolutely. And this has been a refrain that President Obama has raised with Chinese leaders from the day that he took office, that the US-China relationship is extremely important, and there is no problem in the world that can be solved without the cooperation between the US and China. Climate change, of course, is one of them. The US and China are the two biggest emitters of carbon emissions. And clearly on non-proliferation, Iran and North Korea, and sustaining an economic recovery from the financial crisis. On all of these issues, very pressing global issues, there really does need to be more cooperation between the US and China. And I really think that the leaders of both countries recognize that, and that's why I think there will be a willingness to manage their differences and set them aside and try to focus on a positive, more concrete agenda.
Okay, and we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Remember, you can follow our program on Twitter. We'll keep you notified on upcoming shows, and you can send us questions and comments to post to our guests. On the next show, we examine the intrigue over the killing of a Hamas commander in Dubai, where Israeli Secret Service agents involved. Riz Khan is back next week. We'll see you then.